Okay.
You should have just started recording while we were talking naturally.
I want Jamie's "Are
Yeah, I
we
know.
recording?"
And not tell us.
Yeah, I know, but I wanted to save computer space. That's what the IT people call it.
That's what the professionals do.
The computer space.
I needed to save the computer
I don't have
space.
enough computer space. Okay.
I wanted Jamie's burp on there.
I'm sure there will be another one.
Yeah, probably.
It is a beer time. All right.
We should call this beer time.
Beer time with books.
I don't hate it.
Beer time with
It's
books. At
ironic because
the very
we
least.
are here for the books.
Sure. At the very least. Sure, Danny.
The patriarchy strikes again.
I've never been so dismissed in my life.
Okay.
This is gonna be the whole
Sure. At the very least, this episode can be titled "Beer Time with Books."
It's a working. What do they call
It's a
that?
working title.
A working
Yeah.
title.
All right.
All right. Should we discuss the books first?
Well, welcome to Beer Time with Books.
Okay.
So this is our first episode of a book club-esque podcast that we've been brewing on for a little bit.
They can't see my finger go.
Unfortunately, with the podcast, you can't. So let's go ahead and introduce ourselves, number one, and we'll say what we're drinking.
I thought you were going to call yourself number one.
I straight up thought you were gonna say
Number one,
Brian.
I am Brian.
Okay, well, I'm Brian Sudert, and right now I'm drinking Odell Brewing Company Rupture Fresh Grind Ale.
You're not going to say anything about yourself?
Oh, I'm
We'll
not
get
prepared
there.
for this.
I'm just saying my name. All right, I'm Jamie. Hello. I'm drinking Cloudcatcher Milkshake IPA, also from Odell Brewing.
I'm Danny. Also, Odell Brewing Co.
Wow, how did that happen?
I'm drinking the 90 shilling ale. Is that how you say it?
Beautiful, 90 shilling ale. So we have started a podcast to talk books. We don't know how this is going to go. We're very unstructured right now, but we all have some history with books in some way or another. We're here to discuss.
I've
So
never picked up a book.
So we're this is an experiment.
I've never read anything.
We're going to see how a 24-year-old handles reading for the first time.
It's an experiment.
So we're going to go around and just kind of say any experiences we have with reading, any qualifications.
Every experience.
Every
I've
experience.
ever
So
had with reading.
this is probably getting posted to the channel, but last year I had a channel called Brian's Book Bastion, and that is on hiatus right now, so it'll be good to be back on there. But I had read books through that and kind of reviewed them, and that's the main thing I have. I wasn't a huge reader. I had read my whole life, but that was about it. I just really got serious with it then.
I have read a book or two.
Nice.
I double majored in college in English and secondary language arts education. So I'm a high school English teacher. I've read a lot of books. I always read books.
Nice.
I have also always read books. I learned about Goodreads from Jamie in high school, and that's when I discovered that setting goals for reading was
Cool.
and was the best
thing
way
to do, obviously.
to track my reading. I was so excited to discover it. So I'm on Goodreads like once a day. And I love to read several books at once.
Yeah. Yeah, the
Not
Goodreads,
simultaneously.
The Goodreads thing has been really nice, especially just to revisit everything that had been read in years previous? Because I've had mine since high school, and obviously you guys had both just said that you had it
I
too.
actually got mine in middle school.
Oh, middle school, damn.
I would like to clarify.
Well, that's the thing is
Let's
like,
set the record straight.
well, when you look back on like the early Goodreads stuff, it's just funny to see how your book tastes have changed. Because I had a lot of like young adult, obviously, and a little bit of this and that from English class, but it was a lot of that, and it was a lot of angsty reviews of classics of like, I hated doing assignments for this, so it got 2 stars or something like that.
I always like to. You go.
I was gonna say that's a good place to start. Of like, what type of reader are we? Not
that's
just
good.
when did we read?
Yeah.
But I also, no, not also. We are not the same. When I first started like really reading a lot, I thought I was really smart and pretentious and read all the classics and thought they were amazing. And then I moved out of that and became arguably more pretentious and like only read 20th century American literature for like a lot of my early college years. And then I delved more into world things. I took a lot of Caribbean literature classes in college, which is a weird niche that I know a lot about.
But a good one.
A good one. And now where I'm at, I reread the same 10 books every year because I teach them. And then...
Yeah, what'd you just finish?
My juniors read The Crucible play by Arthur Miller, and my sophomores are in the middle of And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, which are both fun. I chose them both because of Halloween, to make it a creepy time for them, because everybody dies in both of those stories.
Go Agatha.
But also in my personal life, I think probably because my job is difficult or demanding, I've started reading more like fantasy and easier novels.
And what was the big one that you were reading this year?
I read the 2 books that are out for the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss, which I really, really loved. And I always thought that I would hate fantasy. So that's cool. But also, type of reader I am, I read half of a book and then put it down and forget about it for 6 months.
That has been a recent trend.
But yeah, so, and then I pick up
But
a
we're here to
different book.
fix that. We're here to
Yeah.
fix that. We're committing to books with this podcast. So.
We are. This is a commitment.
This is a commitment. So, Danny, what type of reader are you now, and what has the journey been from earlier on? Like, if we started
About
from
your
like
journey.
from the beginning of Goodreads, like similar to Jamie,
I credit my love of reading with the Harry Potter series, which I started when I was
which I think a lot of
Real
people can
little.
relate to. Yeah.
and I tried to read them with my mom, and she didn't want to read them with me because she didn't like them, and so I was just like, I'm gonna read them by myself.
Yeah, there was a family banning spree of the Harry Potter books.
My mom suggested that to me when I was like 12, and I was like, that's hilarious.
I knew people. I
That
knew
you
people
think
that
that
had
that's
happened
gonna
to. There was a
happen.
Harry Potter ban. You couldn't read it for witchcraft.
There
purposes.
there
yeah.
were priests
Yeah,
that
advocating.
said that, yeah, no, it was a whole
Yeah.
thing. I did not ascribe to that.
Which is fair. It's a great series.
Yeah, so I always have been like a go to the library and check out 5 books and read them all kind of at once, mostly inspired by the due dates. I was just like, well, I have to return them, so I want to read them all.
Yeah.
And that was much easier, obviously, when I was reading like young adult stuff at the library. But I've continued to do that because I think it helps keep my interest in what I'm reading, and also it's good for my attention span. Sometimes I will have 3 books like in bed with me, and I will just like read 10 pages of one, and then I will switch to 10 pages of another, and then
Yeah.
I will finish 10 pages of another one.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I can't do that.
No.
I do it because I like to start. It makes me feel good just to start the book, and then I want to feel committed to it so
Yeah,
that I come
well,
back to it.
And you have momentum on them anyway if you continue to do it that way. So then, like, there are stories to unravel
I don't have
in multiple directions.
I don't have trouble. Some people I know can't do it because they have trouble keeping track, maybe of what's happening. But I typically don't have a problem.
Yeah, I read multiple books at the same time, not like that. Not
Yeah.
like 10 pages.
I don't do
Yeah.
it very often, but like when I have chunks, like I don't always have hours that I can read. Like on Sunday, I had like all of a sudden I had a bunch of time, and I came home from your house and I started Name of the Wind, and then I had 2 others to start. I was in the middle of Revolutionary Road, and maybe this is a
I
different
wanted
segment.
to read that soon.
It's depressing. It's
I've
putting,
seen that
I've seen
it's
the movie.
putting me
yeah.
in a huge mood.
Yeah.
And I've been reading Devil in the White City for almost a full year, and because it's a lot. So I think also when I'm in a funk with a book, I have to start another one and then come back to it.
That's what I
Yeah.
do. But
I
then
think
it
that's
takes me a
another-
really long time to get back to it.
Yeah,
I think that's
real.
another momentum thing because you're at least reading something, and so you're still like in the process of doing so.
Yeah. So I have always kind of been that kind of reader, and it's been sustainable so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't really do that. I think I did this year have a period where I was reading 2 books at the same time, only because I really wanted to start the next one, but I had a specific order because that's the type of reader I am, is very methodical. Like, I don't really go off of, like, picking random books off the shelves. I usually have a pretty secure plan of, like, I'm going to read this in this amount of time. And so I think that was the only instance where I was reading one book and I wanted to start another. So it was Gravity's Rainbow. I'd been wanting to read it forever, and then I was just like, okay, I'm going to start right now. But the only other time that I do that is with audiobooks. Like, I can do an audiobook and read a physical one at the same time, because to me it kind of separates the stories in a very definitive way. But that's pretty interesting, because I would never do that. I don't think I could do that still. 10-10-10 or whatever else. The 10-10-10 strats over here.
The 10-10-10 strategy.
We're getting labels for
Trademark.
these things. We're going to analyze it to death. But for me, back in the day, like I said earlier, it was a lot of young adult. Harry Potter was huge. My mom read that to me when I was very young. And I remember this was before the movies, and I can't really recall at what book they were at when the movies started coming out. But I know that I wanted to start getting into them because, like, first of all, our neighbors were really into them, and that's where my mom heard about it, and the movies were coming out. So my mom used to read me those, and that carried me a long ways. And then there were other young adult novels, like Hunger Games obviously was huge, and like I read other stuff on the side. I liked a lot of the like dystopian novels, 1984. I believe I read on my own, and you know, just kind of stories like that. And then I fell off reading for a little bit, and you know, I started getting into more mature stuff. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo at the time, my mom read that, which was really weird. I don't know, it's not really her style, but had read that, and then really read Game of Thrones a lot, along with some classics for a class in college, and kind of ripped through those.
Have you read all of those?
I have read all of them, yeah. So I'm
That's so impressive.
anxiously waiting for The Winds of Winter coming out. But yeah, after that, I started finding some books, because Jamie had a bunch of these 20th century novels that she had gotten, and I ended up reading Infinite Jest, which kind of started me into the postmodern works, and it kind of was easy to follow from there, because there's a lot of influence in those. And I like books that are influential, so I kind of follow that path quite a bit. So I've read a lot in that canon, and I think I just need to really flesh out other sides of the reading spectrum. So I'm excited to get into what we're reading. But before we do that, we all have read some books this year. Are there any highlights? Are there any lowlights? We can kind of run through those. And anybody can start if you're still thinking about it.
Just gonna check my Goodreads real fast.
Yeah.
I can talk about
Goodreads needs to sponsor this.
my favorite thing.
Brought
My
to you
favorite
by-
things I read this year, which I already mentioned, the King Killer Chronicles. I read both of those books, like start of this year to beginning of summer ish. They're both really long. The second one is like 1,000 pages, and the first one is, I think, like 800 maybe. But they were recommended to me by a friend, and she doesn't like fantasy a lot, but her husband really does, and so they like made a deal where they had to they got to choose a book where the other person had to read it, and that was the book he chose.
That would be a good segment.
Yeah.
That's kind of what this is.
That's basically what this is. And she ended up really liking it and told me that I would like it, and I was really uneasy about it, mostly because I don't read really long books. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know what it is. I think a sweet spot for a book is like 300 pages. And anything beyond that, I normally am kind of like, okay, I'm done with this story. Like, I get it. Whatever your purpose is here, I get it.
I'm not like that at all.
I know you're not. But also, I think that so many of the books that I really loved in college and read a lot in college were books that, like, needed to get their purpose across in that amount of time. Mm-hmm. Like, because they were so thematic, or so, like, they had such a purpose. Whereas fantasy, I feel like, is more, there's a purpose to it, but it's more for enjoyment than a lot of the books that I read in college are. Like, I feel like if the Stranger by Albert Camus were 1,000 pages long, like, no one would get it. No one would read it.
And it would lose a lot of its power.
Yeah. So I had never picked up books that were that long, really. At all in my life.
Yeah. A lot of the world building aspects of fantasy plays into a longer book much more than books that get into like a lot of symbolism, because then it's kind
like really realistic fiction.
Because then it's kind of just beating you over the head with it. And sometimes, you know, there have been books that do that on purpose that I've loved, but I understand that. Like fantasy, it's just so much easier to access a longer length, because a lot of it is spent on building a world that's so big that it'd be hard to do in a smaller book.
Yeah. Which is just like not a part of fiction that I had delved into, which seems so silly because like both of you guys started with young adult fiction, whereas like the first book that I remember like really, really loving reading and being so enraptured by it was Jane Eyre. And that's like not the same.
Not even in the same vein,
Yeah. So I feel like I've done the opposite of I read the classics and I read pretentious things, and now I'm like, ooh, but fantasy, there's dragons, guys.
And we're like, we know.
So that was a highlight. Are there any lowlights of the year?
Oh, I mean,
I have some lowlights.
Just let's pull up the list.
Hold on.
Well, like I think that my lowlights are gonna be me not finishing books because I'm just disappointed in myself.
Which is fair, and we'll probably get into that with other episodes, because I think there are some books that we were potentially talking about that have been put down by multiple people. So
like I'm still halfway through Let the Great World Spin by Colin McCann, which is beautiful. I read half of it over the summer and I cried at a certain point. Like it's so well written and it's really like intricate, and there's like different storylines that mesh together, but I just haven't been able to pick it back up. And I don't know,
and that's a low light, because you just get disappointed. So it can be a good book and be a low light. It's always difficult when a book you like you put down, because I've done that too. I've finished them later and they're some of my favorites, but it is disappointing when you're like, I don't know why I can't do that right now.
Some books I just feel like are overwhelming, even when
not
they
ready
are
for
really,
it.
really good. And you're just like, I need to meditate
Step back.
on this. I'm going to take a minute.
This is a lot for me right now.
This is a lot.
Yeah. So fair enough on the low light point there. Danny, highlights, lowlights? Either order.
Highlights. I read A Clockwork Orange. And
it's a good book.
It was like one of those books that put me in a mood when I was reading it. I mean, I was just like, I'm depressed and I don't know why. And then I would remember that it was because I had read A Clockwork Orange.
It's so brutal. And
it's brutal, but I really liked that it was so, I don't know, I liked how graphic it was. I thought it was shocking in an effective way. I didn't think it was too much.
Yeah, I liked the way that it was done with how like young everybody is and how everything was given a different name to make it seem not that horrific, but it's like holy crap.
It was shocking. I mean, it was just that was it, and it also made me want to watch the movie, which I still haven't seen.
I want to do that as well. I'm nervous though. I'm nervous.
Books. I'm nervous too.
Yeah.
That was a highlight. That was the second book that I read this year, according to my Goodreads. And then another highlight was The Bell Jar. I had never read any Sylvia Plath. Half the books that I get are from Jamie and or Brian's library on their recommendation.
We're surrounded by it right now.
I have my own library.
Let's paint the picture.
But
there's a rainbow of books behind Danny's head.
My books from their library. Yeah, so The Bell Jar was also really beautiful and heartbreaking, but beautiful. I loved. And oh no, wait. Two other highlights. I read The Hobbit and Fellowship of the Ring, which even if I didn't adore, I mean, everybody can agree they're great. I didn't adore them. I liked them. But that was just a personal accomplishment for me because, that's a series I've been putting off, and I really wanted to read them.
Always a highlight to tackle something that has been on the list for a long time.
The Hobbit I read when I was like 11 and liked it, didn't make a huge impression on me, and so now it was good to read it again. I read a book called Goodbye Vitamin. I don't know if either of you have heard of it. I couldn't even tell you why that's the title because it made a very small impression on me. But it was it was one of those books written in like a diary format, like a daily kind of today this happened, really short things. And it has like a super colorful cover. It's one of those books that's like, it's brand new and Rachel Kong, I think, is the author. It just was ineffective in a lot of ways. And it just seemed kind of like a sad diary, and it just wasn't very interesting. So it was pretty short. I didn't waste a ton of time on it, but I didn't love it. That was a low book for me.
That's fair. And then for me, the low light, I'll start with that. I technically had two because one of them was out of just morbid curiosity, and I was expecting for it to not go well. But one of them, it was. I had mentioned Infinite Jest. I read Brief Interviews with Hideous Men and did not enjoy that really at all. I've read quite a bit of David Foster Wallace's books, and for some reason it didn't hit the same way that a lot of other ones did. It was a lot of dark humor that seemed unnecessary, and I know that it was supposed to be about bad people, but like when somebody nails it too much, it's always kind of weird. I know that there's also I don't know, there's other extraneous factors to that as well, because a lot of stuff came out about his personal life, I suppose, and there's just a lot to unpack in reading something that was hitting those subjects so hard. So not great for me. There are certainly still parts that I found humorous, but that was definitely one of the worst things I read this year. And then the two big highlights, I have been reading a ton of Thomas Pynchon, and both Mason and Dixon and Gravity's Rainbow were amazing novels. I'd say out of the two, I know Gravity's Rainbow is like the big famous one, and it was incredible. But Mason and Dixon was just so well done in the sense that there was a lot that something I love about reading Thomas Pynchon is he gets into a lot of historical a lot of history into his novels, and when you look up a lot of what's included, it's all real. And so it's stuff that you think sounds so outrageous, but he's done so much research into it that anytime you look at it, you learn something because you're curious about it. But at the same time, the way it was written, a lot of his other books have some absurdity through like drug use, or for instance, this one was just a wholesome story told around a campfire to a family. And that made it so much nicer because everything that was weird that was going on was just like this guy trying to make an interesting story. So while it was still crazy and weird at certain points, it was still grounded in history and also very emotionally affecting, which isn't always the case with his work. So those two were definite highlights, and I think I just have two more of his books to go before I've read all of them. So that'll be pretty exciting to get there. But as far as what is to come, the point of this podcast is we are wanting to read some books together. And so obviously this first one is a big introduction into a lot of our reading preferences. But now we're going to be touching into some books that I don't know that even like one of them here doesn't necessarily fit into really anything that we had talked about. So that'll be interesting to hit into. But we have 3 right now. I don't know how many we're going to do. We've talked about various numbers, but we have 3 books that we're definitely going to read.
This is going to go for the next 30 years.
30 years. We're doing this forever.
Be prepared. Lock in, everyone. Subscribe now.
So we've talked about a few books, and a lot of these, there were really no rules. If there were certain books that people wanted to read that they maybe already had read, or maybe it was a book that a person had put down, there's nothing that's really, excuse me, that's that beer. It's your time with books, baby. Let's get it. Your time with books. So we have...
I already forgot the name.
we have 3, and then we have a list coming up, but I think we might post these as we go. And so if anybody does want to follow along, I think what we've kind of talked about is doing 2 episodes per book. I don't know if that's in the vibe what we're going for.
You decided that.
The patriarchy strikes
The patriarchy
again.
has decided. That sounds fine.
So if you are interested in following along...
Danny's going to finish them before we record the first episode.
We'll see. For what we're doing in the future. But we're going to try to do half... just so if anybody wants to follow along, they can not have too many spoilers for the rest of the book and get some good discussion in the meantime. Because that's a thing online. This is such a new thing with a lot of book media that a lot of it's already done when the discussions are going on. Like there are other notable podcasts that I've listened to that they go piece by piece, and I've liked it a lot because it's more interactive. Mm-hmm. But like BookTube, for instance, when I was doing that last year, a lot of them are just done, and people just talk about it just like they already have their view solidified. It's interesting to hear your views midway through because sometimes that's vastly different than where it is at the end. So we have 3 books here.
Is there going to be a quiz in the middle?
I think yes.
What if I'm not done?
We'll see. English teacher.
Are we thinking?
Yeah, I'm the English teacher.
Wait, so are we thinking like we read to a certain page number?
Yeah.
Like a certain chapter?
Something like that. We'll figure it out as we go. It's kind of loosey-goosey right now, but I think we'll just go through...
This isn't airtight, you mean?
We'll go through each of these. We each picked 1 book from our list, so I don't know. We'll each just kind of briefly mention the title and anything, a short reason as to why you chose the book as we all look to the back of each one to read. Let me read the plot synopsis real quick. Okay. So the first one that we're going to be doing is Lincoln in the Bardo. And for a lot of people, this is pretty familiar. It came out very recently and won the Man Booker Prize last year. And I've heard just amazing things. I love historical fiction, and that was something that made this book in particular so exciting. Just like I mentioned with Mason and Dixon, it's a similar vibe with the historical fiction. But Lincoln in the Bardo... this is George Saunders' first novel. He was a short story writer forever, so he kind of came in with a bang here. And I've heard it's pretty emotionally affecting, and Lincoln is just a fascinating guy. And so it'll be interesting to see how he tackles him in this book.
And our second book was my choice. I know very little about it, but it's Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't know. It's one of those books that, like, I've always seen on Barnes & Noble's, like, top 20 whatever table that they want you to buy. And people really love it, and I've never read it. So that's why I chose that. I think that it'll maybe be, like, a more fun, short, quick novel for us rather than the more serious books that my compatriots have chosen.
And I've heard consistently that it's hilarious.
Yeah, like, I think it'll be great. And I want to be in the inner circle of people that have read it.
I feel like it's always on that like anybody's list of books that's just like top 10 books you must read, or maybe, I don't know, 50
Even if you're
books
not a
that you
science
have to
fiction
read.
fan, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's on everybody's list, I feel like.
Yeah.
It has huge crossover appeal, which is pretty interesting.
So I chose 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel García Márquez. I don't know that much about it. I chose it because I have 2 copies on my bookshelf, and I have read neither of them.
Good ratio.
Also, historical fiction. I believe it takes place in a fictional city.
This is true. I have read it.
Jamie has read it. I'm just this just in.
Yeah, I allowed this to be on the list. I'm in charge. Because mostly I read this for a class in college, and I remember really enjoying it, but also being behind in reading for like a majority of it because it was college and I had 5 other books to read and whatever. But I really liked it, and I would like to reread it. I don't remember how it ends because it's been multiple years. And
That's good.
Professor Harrison, if you ever find this, I'm sorry.
Which she could.
I'm
she's
so
very
sorry.
She's very sleuthy.
She's
She
redeeming
could
herself
find it.
now. Also, it won the Nobel Prize, so
Yeah,
that seems important.
yeah, it's a good one.
Great.
The names are confusing.
Yeah, that'll be. I think that'll be a
We'll
mess
have
to
to-
discuss.
We'll have to.
We need character
we need
maps.
We need a whiteboard.
Yeah, we're gonna need a Google Doc
Immediately.
to get it going.
Google
So,
Doc.
so yeah, I think that's gonna be it. So thanks for joining in. Beer Time with Books, tentative title. So we're going to
That's
put
the title.
the title. So we're gonna start with linking in the Bardo. So if anybody does happen to catch this before the next episode's posted, just about halfway is where we're gonna be.
About halfway.
Meet us about
About
halfway.
halfway. And so, yeah, we'll just keep this rolling going forward, but we hope you enjoyed our first introductory podcast, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Danny, sing the outro song.
Do-do-bop-bop. Beep boop.
All right. We'll see you later.